The HOA president wrapped a measuring tape around my wife's throat over a mailbox violation. She squeezed tighter, confident no one could touch her. What she didn't know was our son, a Navy SEAL, was about to come home. Her biggest mistake was thinking we were helpless. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The measuring tape cut into Sarah's throat so quickly that she didn't even have time to scream. I was in the garage, organizing tools, when I heard the commotion outside. Through the narrow window, I could see my wife on her knees in our front yard, her hands clawing at something wrapped around her neck. A woman stood behind her, pulling tighter and tighter. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then rage flooded every cell in my body. I burst through the garage door, my feet pounding against the concrete driveway. "Get your hands off my wife." The woman turned to face me, and I recognized her immediately. Margaret Hutchins. The HOA president. The woman who had made our lives miserable for the past 6 months. She released the measuring tape from Sarah's throat, but the damage was done. My wife collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, her fingers trembling as they touched the angry red marks forming on her skin. "Your mailbox is 3 inches too tall," Margaret said coldly, holding up the measuring tape like it was evidence in a court trial. "I've warned you people twice already. This is unacceptable." I dropped to my knees beside Sarah, my hands shaking as I examined her throat. The welts were already turning purple. Tears streamed down her face, but she couldn't speak. She just looked at me with terrified eyes, the kind of fear I had only seen once before, when she was mugged 10 years ago in downtown Chicago. That night had haunted her for months. Now, in what should have been the safety of our own home, that same terror had returned. "You attacked my wife," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The fury inside me was so intense that I felt like I might explode. "Over a mailbox." Margaret crossed her arms, completely unbothered. "The HOA regulations are clear, Mr. Davidson. Your mailbox exceeds the 42-inch height limit by 3 inches. I've sent you 2 violation notices. You ignored both. When I came to measure it myself, your wife became aggressive and tried to grab my equipment. I was defending myself." "That's a lie." Sarah finally managed to choke out, her voice hoarse and broken. Blood vessels had burst in her eyes from the pressure. "You wrapped that tape around my neck the second I opened the door. I didn't even touch you." Margaret's lips curled into a cruel smile. "That's not how I'll tell it to the police." And between the respected HOA president and a woman who can't even follow simple neighborhood rules, who do you think they'll believe? I helped Sarah to her feet, supporting her weight as she leaned against me. Every instinct told me to do something I would regret, but Sarah's safety came first. I needed to get her inside, check her injuries, call the police, and document everything. My military training kicked in. Assess. Document. Report. Take action. "This isn't over," I told Margaret. "Oh, I know it isn't," she replied, adjusting her pearl necklace with a satisfied smirk. "You have 48 hours to fix that mailbox, or the fines start. $500 per day. And if you think you can fight me, think again. I've removed 7 families from this neighborhood in the past 3 years. You'll be number 8. She walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement with an arrogance that made my blood boil. I watched her climb into her pristine white Mercedes and drive off, probably heading back to her mansion on the hill to celebrate her latest victory over the common people she despised. Inside the house, I sat Sarah down on the couch and grabbed ice from the freezer. My hands were still shaking. I had served 20 years in the military, faced enemy fire in 3 different wars, commanded hundreds of soldiers in combat situations in Iraq and Afghanistan, but nothing had ever made me feel as helpless as watching my wife being attacked in our own front yard. Sarah's breathing was ragged. She kept touching her throat, wincing each time her fingers made contact with the swollen skin. I had seen injuries like this before, in war zones, on soldiers who had been captured and tortured. The fact that it had happened to my wife, in our peaceful suburban neighborhood, over a mailbox height violation, was beyond comprehension. "We need to call the police," Sarah whispered, tears continuing to stream down her face. "Already on it," I said, pulling out my phone with trembling fingers. The police arrived 40 minutes later. 2 officers, both young, both looking like they would rather be anywhere else. Officer Martinez took our statements while Officer Chen photographed Sarah's injuries. They wrote everything down in their little notebooks, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't care. This was just another domestic dispute to them, another he said she said situation that would go nowhere. "We'll file a report," Officer Martinez said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But without witnesses or video evidence, it's going to be difficult to pursue charges. Mrs. Hutchins says your wife attacked her first, and she was defending herself. Look at my wife's neck." I shouted, barely containing my fury. "Does that look like self-defense to you? My wife is 5'3" and weighs 120 pounds. Margaret Hutchins is 5'9" and goes to the gym 5 days a week. Look at the marks. They show sustained pressure, not a brief defensive action." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "I understand your frustration, sir. But Mrs. Hutchins is well respected in this community. She's helped fund the new police station, organized charity events, and the mayor himself attended her Christmas party last year. She sits on 3 different city committees. I'm just saying, these things are complicated." "Complicated?" I felt my voice rising. A woman was assaulted in her own front yard. What's complicated about that? Officer Chen closed his notebook. "Sir, I recommend you both go to the hospital, get the injuries documented by a medical professional. That will help if you decide to press charges. But I have to be honest with you, cases like this rarely go anywhere without solid evidence." After they left, I held Sarah while she cried. She was tough, my wife. She had supported me through 3 deployments, raised our son practically alone while I was overseas, managed our household through countless transfers and relocations, and never once complained about the sacrifices military life demanded. She had stood by me through my own PTSD after Afghanistan, through the nightmares and the anger. But this had broken something inside her. I could feel it in the way she trembled against me, in the way she kept looking toward the windows as if expecting Margaret to return. "I'm scared, Tom," she whispered. "What if she comes back? What if she does something worse? She said she's driven 7 families out. What if we're next?" "She won't," I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "I won't let her hurt you again." But even as I said the words, I felt helpless. Margaret had money, connections, power. She had the police on her side, the mayor, probably half the city council. What did we have? A military pension and a mortgage we could barely afford. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at our bedroom window, watching the street, replaying the attack over and over in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that measuring tape wrapped around Sarah's throat, saw the cruel satisfaction in Margaret's eyes as she pulled it tighter. I thought about all the training I had received, all the situations I had survived, and none of it had prepared me to protect my wife from a neighbor with a measuring tape and a power complex. Around 3 in the morning, Sarah woke up screaming. She had been having a nightmare, reliving the attack. I held her, rocked her, whispered reassurances that felt hollow even to my own ears. When she finally fell back asleep, I made a decision. The next morning, I made a phone call. "Dad?" The voice on the other end was strong, confident, exactly what I needed to hear. "Is everything okay?" "Jake," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I need you to come home. Your mother's been hurt." There was a brief silence, then his voice changed. It became colder, sharper, the voice he used when he was on a mission. "How bad?" "She'll be okay physically. But Jake, someone attacked her. In our front yard. Choked her with a measuring tape. Over a mailbox violation. Another silence. I could almost hear him processing the information, running through scenarios, planning his response. Who did it? The HOA president. Woman named Margaret Hutchins. She's been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. The police won't do anything. She has connections, money, power. I'll be there in 6 hours, he said without hesitation. Don't do anything until I arrive. Document everything. Take photos. Write down exactly what happened, minute by minute. Get medical records. I want evidence of everything. Jake. Dad, trust me. I've got this. Just keep Mom safe until I get there. Jake was our only son. 28 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of pure muscle and determination. He had joined the Navy right out of high school, become a SEAL at 22, and spent the last 6 years on classified missions around the world. I had trained soldiers, led men into combat, earned medals and commendations, but my son had surpassed me in ways I never imagined. He was the kind of man you wanted on your side and never wanted as your enemy. I spent the day documenting everything. I wrote down a detailed timeline of the attack. I took more photos of Sarah's injuries from multiple angles. I photographed the mailbox, the measuring tape Margaret had left behind in her haste to leave, the spot on the lawn where Sarah had collapsed. I went to the hospital and made sure everything was documented in her medical records. The doctor who examined her was horrified. This is strangulation, Dr. Patel said, shaking her head. Not a minor injury. This is a serious assault. The petechiae in her eyes, the bruising pattern, the depth of the marks, whoever did this used significant force. Your wife is lucky she didn't suffer more serious damage. Another few seconds of pressure and we could be having a very different conversation. When Jake walked through the door that evening, Sarah burst into tears and threw her arms around him. He held her gently, carefully, mindful of her injuries. His eyes fixed on the bruises around her neck, now a deep purple-black color. I watched his jaw clench, watched the fury build behind his calm exterior. I knew that look. I had worn it myself many times. Tell me everything, he said quietly, his voice controlled but dangerous. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. We told him the whole story. The 6 months of harassment from Margaret Hutchins. The threatening letters about grass length, paint colors, holiday decorations. The excessive fines for minor violations, $200 because our trash cans were visible from the street, $500 because Sarah planted flowers that weren't on the approved list, $1,000 because I washed my car in the driveway instead of at a car wash. How she had targeted elderly neighbors like Mrs. Chen, single mothers like Elena Rodriguez, anyone she deemed beneath her. We told him about Mr. Patterson, a Vietnam veteran like me, who had been threatened with foreclosure because he couldn't afford to replace his roof immediately after a storm. About the Williams family, who had been driven out after Margaret fabricated violations and racked up $20,000 in fines. About elderly Mr. Thompson, who had died of a heart attack 2 months after Margaret's relentless harassment over his garden gnomes. Jake listened without interrupting. He took notes, asked pointed questions, and I could see his mind working, processing, strategizing. When we finished, he nodded slowly. Where does she live? Jake, we can't, I started. I'm not going to hurt her, Dad, he said calmly. I'm going to introduce myself. As a concerned neighbor. A Navy SEAL who just moved back home to take care of his parents. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. That night, Jake sat at the dining room table with his laptop, working until dawn. I woke up several times and saw the blue light from his screen illuminating his focused face. He was researching, planning, preparing. When I asked what he was doing, he just said, building a case. The next morning, Jake went for a run. He wore his Navy SEAL t-shirt, the one with the Trident logo clearly visible. He ran past Margaret's house 3 times, making sure she saw him. On the 3rd pass, she was outside, inspecting her roses with the same measuring tape she had used to attack Sarah. "Beautiful flowers," Jake called out, slowing to a stop. Margaret looked up, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Do I know you?" "Jake Davidson," he said, extending his hand. "I just moved back to help my parents. You know, Tom and Sarah Davidson. The couple with the mailbox that's 3 inches too tall." Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by calculation. She shook his hand, her grip cold and brief. "I see. Well, your parents need to follow the rules like everyone else." "Of course," Jake agreed pleasantly. "I actually wanted to talk to you about that. My mom has some pretty bad bruising on her neck. Deep tissue damage, according to her doctor. She says you were measuring the mailbox and things got out of hand." Margaret's expression hardened. "Your mother attacked me. I was defending myself." "That's strange," Jake said, his voice still friendly but with an edge that could cut steel. "Because my mother is 5'3" and weighs 120 pounds. You're taller, stronger, and you were holding a metal measuring tape. In the military, we call that a force disparity. It means the person with the advantage has a responsibility to de-escalate, not attack. We also learn about strangulation injuries. The pattern on my mother's neck shows sustained pressure from behind, not a defensive reaction." "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Jake interrupted, his smile never wavering. "I'm just observing. You see, I've spent the last 6 years learning how to read people, how to assess threats, how to respond to hostile situations. I've operated in war zones, dealt with terrorists, handled situations where lives hung in the balance. And what I'm seeing here is a pattern of aggressive behavior toward vulnerable people. That concerns me." Margaret took a step back. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all," Jake said. "I'm just letting you know that things are different now. My mother isn't alone anymore. She has someone watching out for her. Someone who takes threats very seriously. Someone who has resources, skills, and a very particular set of abilities when it comes to dealing with bullies." He jogged away, leaving Margaret standing in her rose garden, her face pale with anger and something that might have been fear. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake did his homework. He talked to every neighbor who had been targeted by Margaret. Mrs. Chen, the elderly widow who had been fined $10,000 for having the wrong shade of beige paint on her shutters. She cried as she told Jake how she had to drain her savings account, money she had been saving for her grandson's college education, just to pay Margaret's fines. The Rodriguez family, who had been forced to remove their children's playset because it was visible from the street. Elena Rodriguez worked 2 jobs to support her 3 kids after her husband died. Margaret's fines had pushed her to the brink of bankruptcy. Mr. Patterson, a decorated veteran like me, showed Jake the foreclosure notice he had received. Margaret had claimed his property was in violation of 17 different regulations. The fines totaled $38,000. He was going to lose his home, the home he had lived in for 40 years. Every person had the same story. Margaret Hutchins was a bully who used the HOA as her personal weapon. She targeted people she thought were weak, people who couldn't fight back. And she had gotten away with it because of her money, her connections, and the fear she inspired. Jake compiled everything into a detailed report. Names, dates, violation notices, photographs, bank records showing the excessive fines. He even found the original HOA charter, buried in city records, which showed that many of Margaret's rules were actually her own inventions, not official regulations. The charter specified that the HOA board should consist of 5 elected members, but Margaret had been operating as a dictator for 3 years, making unilateral decisions without proper votes. He discovered something else, too. Margaret had been embezzling HOA funds. The association collected annual dues from all 200 households, $500 each. That was $100,000 a year. But somehow, the HOA always claimed to be broke. Jake traced the money. Margaret had been transferring funds to her personal accounts, disguising them as administrative fees, consulting costs, and maintenance expenses. Then he did something brilliant. He started attending HOA meetings. Margaret hated it. You could see the rage on her face every time Jake walked into the community center, sat in the front row, and took notes on everything she said. He recorded the meetings on his phone, asked pointed questions about budget allocations, and requested copies of financial statements that Margaret claimed didn't exist. At the third meeting, Margaret made her move. She called for a vote to increase fines for mailbox violations from $500 to $1,000 per day. It was clearly targeted at my family. Jake stood up. Point of order, he said calmly. According to the HOA charter, any fine increase requires a 2/3 majority vote from homeowners, not just board members. I'd like to call for a full community vote on this matter. Margaret's face turned red. That's not necessary. The board has the authority. Actually, it doesn't, Jake continued, pulling out a copy of the original charter. Section 12, Paragraph 4. It's very clear. Any fine structure changes require approval from 66% of all homeowners. Unless you're saying the charter doesn't matter. Because if we're ignoring the charter, then technically none of your fines have any legal basis. Murmurs rippled through the room. Other homeowners, people who had been too scared to speak up before, started nodding. Jake had done something Margaret never expected. He had read the rules, the actual rules, not her twisted version of them. Furthermore, Jake continued, I've reviewed the HOA financial statements for the past 3 years. Or rather, I've tried to. Because they don't exist. According to state law, HOAs must maintain transparent financial records and make them available to homeowners upon request. I've requested them 3 times. Why haven't you provided them, Mrs. Hutchins? Margaret stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This meeting is adjourned. You can't adjourn a meeting unilaterally, Jake said. That also violates the charter. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president. Do I have a second? 3 hands shot up immediately. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. Within seconds, half the room had their hands raised. Margaret looked around at the sea of raised hands, at the faces of people she had terrorized for years, now finding courage in numbers. You can't do this, she said, her voice shaking. Actually, we can, Mr. Patterson said, standing up slowly with his cane. According to Section 8 of the Charter, any homeowner can call for a vote of no confidence. It requires a simple majority to remove a board member. Let's vote. The vote was overwhelming. 43 to remove Margaret, only 2 to keep her, and those 2 votes came from her sister and her best friend. Margaret's face went from red to white. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that it rattled the windows. After the meeting, the newly elected HOA board, which included Jake, Mr. Patterson, and 3 other longtime residents, began the process of reviewing all of Margaret's decisions. They found evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power that went back years. Jake contacted the state attorney general's office with a detailed report. He also reached out to a lawyer friend who specialized in HOA disputes and agreed to take on the case pro bono after hearing about what Margaret had done to the neighborhood. But Margaret wasn't done yet. 2 days after being removed from the HOA board, she struck back. She filed a restraining order against Jake, claiming he had threatened her. She filed a defamation lawsuit against our family, seeking $2 million in damages. She convinced her lawyer husband to file liens against our property and several other homes in the neighborhood. She's trying to bury us in legal fees, I said, reading through the stack of legal documents that had been delivered that morning. We can't afford this. Jake remained calm. She's panicking. People who panic make mistakes. Let her come at us. I've got everything documented. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. Margaret showed up with 2 lawyers, perfectly dressed, projecting confidence and respectability. Jake showed up alone, carrying a simple folder. Margaret's lawyer painted Jake as a dangerous, unstable veteran who had threatened his client. He used every stereotype about PTSD and violent soldiers. He made it sound like Jake was a ticking time bomb. Then it was Jake's turn. He stood up, calm and professional. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence." He opened his folder and began systematically dismantling Margaret's case. He showed the photos of Sarah's injuries. He played the audio recordings from HOA meetings where Margaret made threats against homeowners. He presented bank statements showing the embezzlement. He showed emails where Margaret bragged to her friends about teaching the peasants a lesson. The judge's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. When Jake finished, there was silence in the courtroom. "Mrs. Hutchins," the judge said coldly, "not only am I denying your request for a restraining order, I'm also referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. What you've done here amounts to assault, fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. You should count yourself fortunate that Mr. Davidson is a more patient man than most." Margaret's face went pale. She tried to speak, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and shook his head. Outside the courthouse, Margaret cornered Jake in the parking lot. Her perfect composure had cracked. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "I still have money. I still have connections. I will destroy you and your pathetic family." Jake looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Hutchins, I've been shot at by terrorists. I've jumped out of helicopters in the middle of the night. I've faced situations where one wrong move meant death for me and my team. You're a bully who attacks elderly people and women over mailbox heights. You don't scare me. You're not even on my radar as a threat. I have the best lawyers in the state. And I have evidence," Jake interrupted. "Evidence of everything you've done. The assault on my mother. The embezzlement. The fraud. The threats. The families you've destroyed. I have 17 people willing to testify against you. I have financial records. I have recordings. I have everything I need to end you." Margaret's hands were shaking. For the first time in years, she was the one who felt helpless. "What do you want?" "First, you're going to apologize to my mother. A real apology, in writing, admitting what you did. Second, you're going to refund every excessive fine you've charged to every homeowner in this community. Third, you're going to make a donation to the local women's shelter, in my mother's name, for $50,000. And fourth, you're going to cooperate fully with the district attorney's investigation." "That's extortion." "No," Jake corrected. "Extortion is what you've been doing for 3 years. This is justice. You have 24 hours to comply. If you don't, I'll make sure every news station in the state gets a copy of everything I have. Your reputation, your social standing, your perfect life, all of it will be gone. Your husband will find out about the money you stole. Your friends will see you for what you really are. Your social clubs will kick you out. Everything you've built on the backs of people you terrorized will crumble." He walked away, leaving Margaret standing alone in the parking lot, her carefully constructed world falling apart around her. The next day, a letter arrived at our house. It was from Margaret, handwritten on expensive stationery. In it, she admitted to attacking Sarah without provocation, apologized for her behavior, and took full responsibility for her actions. She also included a check for $15,000, refunding all the fines she had charged us over the past 6 months. Similar letters went to every family she had targeted. Within a week, over $200,000 had been refunded to homeowners across the community. The women's shelter confirmed they had received a $50,000 donation in Sarah's name. But the consequences for Margaret went deeper than money. Her husband, James Hutchins, a prominent attorney, filed for divorce after discovering the embezzlement and the assault. He had built his reputation on integrity and honesty, and he couldn't be associated with what his wife had become. The district attorney filed criminal charges: assault, fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Margaret's trial was set for 6 months out, but the damage to her reputation was immediate. Her country club membership was revoked. Her charity organizations asked her to step down. Her friends stopped returning her calls. Margaret Hutchins disappeared from the neighborhood shortly after. Her mansion on the hill went up for sale, and within a month, she was gone. Rumor was she had moved to another state, trying to rebuild her life away from the ruins of her old one. The new HOA board, properly elected by actual homeowners rather than appointed by Margaret, immediately removed most of the ridiculous rules she had imposed. Mailbox heights, paint colors, grass length, none of it mattered anymore. People could actually enjoy their homes without fear of harassment. Mrs. Chen planted a vegetable garden in her front yard, something Margaret had banned. She grew tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, and shared them with the entire neighborhood. The Rodriguez children got their play set back, bigger and better than before, and the sound of children's laughter filled the street again. Mr. Patterson let his grass grow a little wild during the hot summer months, and nobody cared. He kept his home. The neighborhood transformed. People who had been afraid to even talk to their neighbors started having barbecues and block parties. The constant tension that Margaret had created evaporated, replaced by a genuine sense of community. As for Sarah, the physical wounds healed within a few weeks, but the emotional scars took longer. She had nightmares for months, waking up in a panic, feeling like someone was choking her. She started therapy, working through the trauma with a counselor who specialized in assault victims. Jake stayed with us for 3 months, making sure she felt safe, helping her recover her confidence. He walked with her every morning, talked to her about his own experiences with trauma and recovery, and slowly, she began to heal. One evening, about 4 months after the attack, we sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. Sarah was between us, her head resting on my shoulder, Jake's hand holding hers. The bruises were completely gone now, replaced by smooth skin that showed no sign of the attack. "Thank you," Sarah whispered to Jake. "For everything. For coming home. For fighting for us. For showing me that bullies don't always win. You raised me to protect people who can't protect themselves," Jake said quietly. "You taught me that real strength means standing up for others, not putting them down. You showed me what courage looks like every single day, when Dad was deployed, when money was tight, when things were hard. I was just doing what you showed me, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." I looked at my son, this incredible man who had become everything I hoped he would be and more. He had used his training, his skills, his strength, not for revenge or violence, but for justice. He had taken a bully who thought she was untouchable and shown her that actions have consequences. Margaret Hutchins had made a fatal mistake. She had assumed that Sarah was alone, that she was weak, that she had no one to stand up for her. She had no idea that behind that kind, gentle woman was a husband who had led soldiers into battle and a son who was one of the most elite warriors in the world. But more than that, she had failed to understand something fundamental about bullies. They only have power when people are afraid. Once someone stands up to them, once someone shows them that their threats are empty and their power is an illusion, they crumble like paper in rain. 6 months later, I was in the front yard, installing a new mailbox. This one was 45 inches tall, exactly 3 inches taller than the old regulation. I did it on purpose, as a reminder. A reminder that we had won, that we had taken our neighborhood back, that we would never be intimidated again. Nobody said a word. Jake helped me cement it in place, and Sarah brought us lemonade while we worked. As we stood back to admire our work, a car pulled up. It was Mrs. Chen, with a plate of homemade cookies. "I saw you putting in the new mailbox," she said with a smile. "I wanted to thank you again. All of you. For giving us our neighborhood back. For showing us that we don't have to be afraid anymore. We were happy to help, Sarah said, accepting the cookies. Her voice was strong now, confident. The fear that had haunted her eyes for months was gone. After Mrs. Chen left, Jake turned to me. I have to go back in 2 weeks. New assignment. I felt a pang of worry, the same worry I had felt every time he deployed. Where? Can't say, he replied with a grin. But don't worry. I'm good at what I do. And I know that whatever happens, wherever I am, I've got a family worth fighting for. You taught me that, Dad. Both of you. I know you are, son, I said, pulling him into a hug. I know you are. Just come home safe. Always do, he said. As I held him, I thought about how lucky we were. Not just because he had saved us from Margaret Hutchins, but because he reminded us what true strength looked like. It wasn't about size or power or money. It wasn't about intimidation or fear. It was about standing up for what was right, protecting those who needed protection, and never backing down from bullies, no matter how powerful they seemed. Margaret had learned that lesson the hard way. She had thought a measuring tape could be a weapon, that fear and intimidation could control people, that her position and money made her invincible. She had thought she could attack a woman in her own front yard and get away with it. She was wrong. Because behind every victim, there might be someone watching. Someone who won't accept injustice. Someone who knows how to fight back. Someone like my son, the Navy SEAL who came home to protect his mother and ended up saving an entire neighborhood. And that night, as we sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out above our neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Safety. Hope. Pride in my son, love for my wife, and gratitude for the second chance our neighborhood had been given. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served. And the measuring tape that Margaret had used as a weapon was now just a memory, a reminder that bullies always fall, and families always protect their own. Sarah squeezed my hand. I love our mailbox, she said with a smile. I looked at it, standing proud and tall, 3 inches above the old regulation. A symbol of our victory, our resistance, our refusal to be controlled. Me too, I said. Me too. A year later, we received a letter from the women's shelter. They had used Margaret's donation to open a new wing dedicated to helping victims of domestic abuse and assault. They named it the Sarah Davidson Center for Courage. When Sarah saw the plaque with her name on it, she cried. But these were different tears. Not tears of pain or fear, but tears of healing and purpose. Something good had come from something terrible. Her trauma had been transformed into hope for other women who needed help. Jake was there for the opening ceremony, home on leave. He stood beside Sarah as she cut the ribbon, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes scanning the crowd with the same protective instinct that had saved her a year ago. Even in celebration, even surrounded by friends and supporters, he remained vigilant. That was who he was, who he would always be. The director of the shelter gave a speech about courage, about standing up to bullies, about how one family's fight for justice had helped hundreds of women find safety and hope. She talked about how Sarah's story had inspired other victims to come forward, to report their abusers, to seek help. The ripple effect of that one act of justice had spread far beyond our neighborhood. As we drove home that evening, Sarah was quiet. Finally, she spoke. Do you think Margaret learned anything? Do you think she understands what she did? Jake considered the question carefully. I don't know, Mom. Some people never learn. Some people are so wrapped up in their own power and privilege that they can't see the harm they cause. But it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that she can't hurt anyone else. And maybe, somewhere, someone heard your story and found the courage to stand up to their own bully. Maybe some other woman decided not to stay silent when she was attacked. Maybe some other neighborhood decided to fight back against corruption. That's what matters. That was enough. Justice wasn't just about revenge or punishment. It was about making sure the vulnerable were protected, that the strong used their strength wisely, and that bullies understood there were consequences for their actions. It was about creating a world where people like Margaret couldn't thrive, where power didn't equal immunity, where standing up for what was right actually meant something. Margaret Hutchins had choked my wife with a measuring tape, thinking she could get away with it. She had no idea my son was a Navy SEAL. But more than that, she had no idea that she was attacking a family who would never stop fighting for each other, a family who understood that real power came from love and loyalty, not fear and intimidation. She had no idea that her act of cruelty would unite an entire neighborhood against her, would expose years of corruption, would end her reign of terror. In the end, the measuring tape measured more than just a mailbox. It measured the distance between cruelty and justice, between weakness and strength, between a bully's arrogance and a family's unbreakable bond. It measured the line between getting away with abuse and facing consequences. It measured the point where fear ends and courage begins. And Margaret Hutchins fell short on every measure that mattered. Our neighborhood is different now. People look out for each other. We have monthly meetings where everyone has a voice, not just one person with a power complex. The HOA funds are transparent, published online for everyone to see. Decisions are made democratically, with real votes and real accountability. Mr. Patterson still lives in his house, his lawn a little wild but his spirit intact. Mrs. Chen's vegetable garden is the envy of the block. The Rodriguez kids play outside until dark, their laughter echoing through the streets. And our mailbox stands 45 inches tall, a monument to the day we said enough. Sarah went back to work at the library, something she had been too afraid to do when Margaret was around. She had worried about leaving the house empty, about what violations Margaret might find while we were gone. Now she works full-time, recommends books to patrons, and comes home smiling. Jake visits when he can, between deployments and training missions. Each time he comes home, Sarah hugs him a little tighter, holds on a little longer. She knows what he did for her, for us, for the entire neighborhood. She knows that when she needed him most, he came home and fought a different kind of battle, one without guns or explosives, but no less important. Last month, we got a call from a neighborhood 3 towns over. They were dealing with their own HOA tyrant, someone who was using the same tactics Margaret had used. They had heard about what happened in our community and wanted advice. Jake talked to them for an hour, explaining how to document everything, how to organize residents, how to use the rules against the people abusing them. He told them about transparency, accountability, and the power of people standing together. When he hung up, he looked satisfied. That's 3 neighborhoods now that have reached out, he said. 3 communities that are fighting back because they heard what we did. Mom's attack started something bigger than any of us expected. Sarah touched her throat, where the scars had long since faded but the memory remained. I wish it hadn't happened, she said softly. But if my pain can help someone else avoid the same thing, then maybe it wasn't completely meaningless. It was never meaningless, Mom, Jake said. You survived. You fought back. You refused to be a victim. That matters. That inspires people. 2 years after the attack, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Margaret Hutchins. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, Sarah and Jake both watching. The letter was short, handwritten in shaky script that looked nothing like Margaret's usual perfect penmanship. Dear Tom, Sarah, and Jake. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take accountability for my actions, and more importantly, because I finally understand what I did. I attacked Sarah over a mailbox. I put my hands on another human being, hurt her, traumatized her, because of 3 inches of metal and wood. When I say it out loud, I can't believe I was that person. But I was. I've spent the last 2 years in therapy, working through my own issues, my need for control, my fear of not being important, my toxic belief that power meant dominating others. I've lost everything that mattered to me, and I'm starting to realize that most of it was built on fear and cruelty anyway. I can never undo what I did. I can never give Sarah back the sense of safety I stole from her. I can never erase the fear I caused in an entire neighborhood. But I want you to know that I think about it every day. I live with what I did. And I'm trying to be better, even though better will never be good enough. I don't expect a response. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry, and that you changed my life by refusing to let me get away with what I did. Jake, you could have destroyed me completely, but you gave me a chance to make some things right. That mercy, which I didn't deserve, is something I'll never forget. I hope Sarah is healing. I hope your neighborhood is thriving. And I hope, someday, I can be even a fraction of the person you all are. Margaret. We sat in silence after I finished reading. Sarah's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying from pain anymore. These were complicated tears, the kind that come when you realize that even monsters can become human again, that even the worst people can change. Do you want to respond? I asked her. Sarah thought for a long moment. No, she said finally. I don't need to. She's on her own journey now. Mine is different. I've healed. I've moved forward. That's enough. Jake nodded approvingly. You don't owe her anything, Mom. Not forgiveness, not acknowledgement, nothing. What you've done, surviving, thriving, helping others, that's your victory. She gets to live with what she did. That's her consequence. We threw the letter away, not out of anger, but out of closure. Margaret Hutchins was no longer a part of our lives, no longer someone we needed to think about or respond to. She was a chapter that had ended, a battle that had been won. That evening, as the sun set over our neighborhood, I stood in the front yard looking at our mailbox. 45 inches of defiance, of courage, of victory. Jake came out to stand beside me, and Sarah joined us a moment later, wrapping her arms around both of us. I love you both so much, she said. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for fighting for all of us. Always, Jake and I said in unison. And in that moment, standing together in the golden light of sunset, with our two tall mailbox standing proud and our neighborhood full of laughter and life, I realized something important. Margaret Hutchins had tried to break us, tried to make us smaller, tried to force us into submission. Instead, she had made us stronger. She had united a neighborhood. She had given us a story of courage and justice that would inspire others. She had shown us that ordinary people, armed with nothing but determination and love for each other, could defeat even the most powerful bullies. The measuring tape that had been a weapon became a symbol. The attack that was meant to intimidate became a rallying cry. The victim became a survivor, and then a symbol of hope. And the Navy SEAL who came home to protect his mother? He became a legend in our neighborhood, proof that heroes don't always fight foreign enemies in distant lands. Sometimes they fight battles right here at home, in suburban neighborhoods, against people who think they're untouchable. Margaret Hutchins learned the hard way that no one is untouchable. That power without accountability is tyranny. That cruelty always has consequences. And that when you attack someone's family, you better be prepared for what comes next. She wasn't prepared. She never saw Jake coming. She never imagined that the woman she choked with a measuring tape had raised a warrior who would stop at nothing to protect her. She never understood that behind every victim is a family, a community, a network of people who will stand up when it matters most. That was her biggest miscalculation. Not underestimating Jake's skills or training or determination. But underestimating the power of love, family, and community. Underestimating what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough. Underestimating the simple truth that justice, real justice, always finds a way. Our mailbox stands 45 inches tall. It stands as a reminder of what we survived, what we fought for, what we won. Every time I see it, I think about that terrible day when Sarah was attacked, and then I think about everything that came after. The healing, the justice, the transformation of our entire neighborhood. And I smile. Because in the end, Margaret Hutchins didn't just lose. She lost to the very people she thought were beneath her. She lost to a librarian, a retired soldier, and a Navy SEAL who understood that real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about protecting them. She lost to love. She lost to family. She lost to justice. And she'll never forget it. Neither will we. But while she remembers her defeat, we remember our victory. And that makes all the difference.